I don't agree with that term of unexplained fertility. It is my job to dig that little bit deeper into what's going on so I can help get my clients the answers and the right support from their clinical teams. You treat someone as an individual, which means no one treatment will ever be the same. Acupuncture in general is more than just sticking needles in people. It's a holistic form of medicine that looks at a person as a whole.
Samina, let's take it from the very beginning. Welcome.
Hi, Anastasia. Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here and have this opportunity to chat with you.
I used to come to you as my acupuncturist. We then moved, so
That's right,
unfortunately
yeah.
I couldn't any longer because I now literally live on the other side of town. But I remember literally after the first or second session, I was, I don't know, kind of reflecting on it, and I was saying to my husband, like, wow, Samina has such an incredible job. Like, she can literally help people, get pregnant, or help people, deal with pains. Because I remember how even like after the first or second, session, when the period came, it wasn't as painful. So I was like, whoa, that's so crazy. Like, literally, Samina has this superpower to help people. So that must have been such an incredible feeling for you, right? When you started and you started hearing that feedback from people. Like, how did that experience feel for you?
It always took me by surprise, actually. I always knew when you're training and you're learning, you know that the medicine that you're working with is incredibly powerful. But it's only until when you physically start to see it in those changes that people talk about as they kind of progress through treatment. When they come to life, it's like, wow, this really, really does work. And it's immense, that feeling and that you see when you can see those significant changes in people, because something in their face and their
Yeah.
expression, how they light up, it completely changes, because not only is it a joyful moment for me, but it's a light bulb moment for them. And your example is one of the common things that I notice in my practice, is that reduction of period pain. And when they realize that those debilitating cramps, those awful PMS symptoms, that days spent doubled over in pain, hot water bottles, hot baths, painkillers, that it's not normal.
Exactly. Yeah. But we're so used to that. We're so used to thinking that's normal, right? And like that I have friends who just, their period is coming and they immediately pop a painkiller, not even because they feel like already need it, just because it's so common and they're so used to it, right? So it almost becomes like a
Absolutely.
routine, but that's so bad when you think about it, right? Like that we use painkillers so often to kind of combat these symptoms when there's something quite natural like acupuncture that can help with it.
Absolutely. And I think it's also a lack of education, which stems from growing
Yeah.
up, teenage years. I think most people can probably relate to the idea of, you know, menstrual health. Well, there wasn't really any education around
No.
menstrual health. You had a degree of sex ed, but that was always just about how not to get pregnant.
Exactly. Yeah.
Literally that's all it was. There was
Yeah.
no education around anything else to do with what menstrual health means for women, and not just from a female perspective, but from a male perspective as well. It's like,
Yes.
that understanding and support that we should have for one another. So yes, it can be just incredibly enlightening when you realize that isn't how it's meant to be. Obviously, sometimes these symptoms can indicate that there's something a little bit more serious going on that needs to be investigated. But that's not always the case, and it should just be a conversation that gets started earlier, so women can recognize what's going on and connect with that body, much earlier
Yeah.
on, so they have the tools to be able to kind of move things forwards when they go, this isn't right. This
Yes. And
isn't how
it's
it should
so,
be.
or at least I found it so empowering to even take control over that, because so many, I mean, I've myself been on the pill for so long. I think I started it when I was like 14, 15, and not even for contraception purposes, but literally because I got my first period and then it was super irregular. And then my doctor at that time was just like, here, take the contraceptive pill. It will regulate your cycle, which I now know is the biggest, right? Just nonsense, because well, it's not a real period you're getting, right, when you're on the pill. And then I was on it for a decade at least, if not longer. So when I got off it and actually started then also tracking my cycle with measuring temperatures, I really felt like so enlightened and empowered by getting this, all this knowledge about how everything works. So would love for you to talk a little bit more about that cycle tracking, because I know that you kind of always like to start, right, with people measuring their fever or measuring their temperatures in the
Yeah,
morning, just for someone who's
temperature.
not familiar with that. Like, how does it work? Why do we do that? And what do you learn from it?
It kind of broadly comes under this idea that, and people may have heard of this idea of fertility awareness method. So fertility awareness is ways of tracking your menstrual cycle and your fertile days to historically was to prevent pregnancy without the need for use of either barrier or hormonal contraceptives. But fertility awareness is so much more than that. It's even on just a basic level, being able to understand and connect with your menstrual cycle. This fertility awareness where we track our cycles, we measure our body temperatures, we look at our physical symptoms and changes in the body, enable us to really get a better understanding of actually what our cycle is doing and what is
Mhm.
happening at the different stages. So one of those methods that you mentioned was basal temperature tracking, which is the idea of being able to take your temperature at a point where the body is at its most rested. So that would be first thing in the morning, literally just before you wake up in the morning. So your alarm goes off, you don't get out of bed, you grab your thermometer or your femtech, be it Oura Ring or a
Yeah.
number of the other devices that are around, and you measure your body temperature. When you start to plot that over the course of one menstrual cycle, more often than not, women will notice that in the first half of your cycle, their temperatures will generally be a bit lower. And then after they ovulate, their temperatures in the second half of the cycle are raised. And you'll generally notice a shift somewhere right bang in the middle, which indicates your ovulation. It's not the fertile window, which happens before ovulation, but it's that spike that ovulation has occurred. And that can give us so much information as to whether somebody's ovulating, whether someone's under a lot of stress, because you'll see these kind of like little roller coaster highs and lows in the chart. You might see that someone's temperatures generally are very, very low or they're very, very high. And that can indicate a number of different things that just might be going on that could be having some aspect of impact on someone's ability to conceive. So it's such a simple method, but so insightful. And just even doing that alone can just, as I said, reveal so much information. Another method to again understand whether someone's ovulating or not is checking for cervical mucus. So a lot of people might be like, cervical mucus, but it's a vital sign for us, as is
Mhm.
the period for women. And monitoring these changes throughout your cycle, and especially around of your ovulation window and your fertile window, you will see changes that resemble, I suppose, the consistency of egg whites is the best way to describe it. And when you notice that, that is a sure way of understanding that ovulation is going to be around the corner or you're entering your fertile phase. Then The other way is just monitoring the rest of the cycle, your other kind of changes in yourself. Women often report during the first half of the cycle, called the follicular phase, often feeling that they're up for anything. They've got so much energy, they're raring to go. Many women come into my clinic reporting going, that particular time is the best time that they feel the best.
Yeah.
And then quite often around ovulation, they might also notice a big shift in energy. Often the libido might rise quite a bit around that time. So again, you're like, oh, I know something hormonally is shifting and changing around this time. And then for many women, once that period has passed, they enter what is known as the luteal phase of their cycle. And often this is time when people want to slow down a little bit.
The mellow phase.
It's a little bit easy, and just everything's just like it should be, just calm and gentle. Just like you might want to stay in a little bit more. You maybe don't have as much kind of like get up and go to kind of do things, which is connected to the hormone progesterone in that second part of your cycle. And then when you get towards when your period is due, once your hormones start to tailor off and start to decline, signaling the end of your cycle, many women then report noticing certain PMS symptoms. So PMS is premenstrual syndrome, which typically occurs anything from like 3 to 5 days before your period. For some people, it can be longer and it can be more severe. But typically, people might notice a bit of breast tenderness, perhaps, maybe a bit of headache, a few headaches, or mood changes. So just maybe feeling a little bit more irritable or perhaps a bit anxious. But the moment the period starts, generally it all settles down and we're back to square one again. So we have so much power in our symptoms and knowledge available to us to be able to really connect with our cycles, and that can be so helpful coming back to women and couples or solo parents who want to conceive. So it's one of the things I really like to talk a lot about with my patients, especially if they're new to it.
Yeah, and I think for people also, or for women who have never had fertility acupuncture, I was also quite surprised that every session we would first sit down, right, for probably like 15, 20 minutes and just chat, like look at my latest tracking, at your cycle, kind of you would ask me how I'm feeling, all the symptoms. And I think that's so important to us understand that, fertility acupuncture is not just you go, say hi, lie down, needles go in your body and you leave. But it's I found it to be like such a holistic support. And especially when you go through fertility, or I don't like saying infertility, but let's say fertility challenges, it can be almost like a little bit of a therapy session, I found, just to talk about like, how are you feeling? Because when doctors don't usually ask you like, how are you feeling? They look more at like, what's going on, what is the medication, and so on. So that's also such a nice part that I found, to really have that support who, looks at you as a whole person, right? As a whole woman. Yeah.
Absolutely. Fertility but what, acupuncture in general is more than just, sticking needles in people.
Yeah.
So I like to talk about the idea that for acupuncture to not be seen as acupuncture points are pills. It is not that kind of medicine. It's a holistic form of medicine that looks at a person as a whole. So we consider that the mind and the physical body are intertwined, they're interlinked. You can't have one without the other. And even when you think about that from a Western medicine perspective, the brain is the master controller. It controls everything, our breathing, our digestion. Yes, they are systems, but they communicate with the brain in order to regulate themselves, in order to function in the way that they do. So you simply just can't view one without the other. And to your point about when you go and see maybe your GP, or that they are skilled in their clinical diagnostics,
Yeah.
and in the way that they support people. However, there just isn't the time to explore the person on an individual basis. And that's at the core of Chinese medicine and acupuncture. You treat someone as an individual, which means no one treatment will ever be the same. I could have 5 people coming to see me for different fertility concerns and issues, and each and every one of their treatments that I will do with them will never mirror another person's,
Wow.
because it's tailored and it's individualized to yourself each and every time. So I find that beautiful. It's an art form in itself.
That's so
So
beautiful. But let's talk about the needle part, because I think so
yeah.
many people I've also spoke to are afraid of the needles. And I myself, before I started acupuncture and way before I even started with IVF, I was also
Mm.
not a fan of needle. I mean, at this point, I'm like, needles, it's no big deal, right? After having been through IVF. But I think people are afraid, of like that aspect of, oh my God, needles being stuck in my body, and maybe even someone going through IVF thinking, oh my God, more needles. Why would I do that to
Of
myself?
course.
So, what is your advice, or what do you usually say to people that are kind of afraid of that needle aspect of acupuncture?
So, I'm being very, very honest about this. Needles just might not be for everybody. Um, it it's a wonderful treatment, but if someone does have an extreme fear around it, it doesn't matter how many times they keep coming. If they come into a session full of fear, full of anxiety, and remain very tense during that session as a result of it, it will never do them do to them what I need the treatment to do. And this is despite, I discuss with my patients how the needles feel. In some cases, I might even show it to them so they can have a visual look to see that by no means are they the same size or
Yeah,
thickness as hypodermic needle syringes, or needles that you inject
yeah,
yourself.
they're tiny.
They're,
Yeah,
they're absolutely tiny. They are the size of a hair strand. And for the most part, the treatment is generally painless. You might notice a bit of sensation around points, and that's correct. That's what you should be feeling, but in no way should it be painful or sore. And certainly is not the same level of sensation when you have, a venous draw from a vein for a blood test, a vaccination, or if you're injecting yourself with IVF medication. So we talk a lot about it, and actually, when after the first couple of treatments, most patients are very pleasantly surprised of how gentle it feels, and more often just how relaxing it is. But as I said, it's not always for everybody. So in those particular cases, I will make some recommendations to them about what they could think about doing to support themselves, and maybe explore other non-invasive therapies like reflexology. Reflexology is wonderful for those people who have extreme fears.
yeah.
But I don't know if I said this before, but I'm a naturopath as well. So I look at other aspects outside of acupuncture to support my treatments and my treatment plans for patients. So naturopathy will often look at aspects like diet, looking at lifestyle medicine, maybe looking at supplementation, certain like homeopathic or herbal treatments that are widely available that don't need to be prescribed to support their journey. So, in many of those cases, I will look and explore those aspects for that patient using online consultations as a way of being able to create a robust plan for them. So it can be very helpful in those early days, especially if they're a bit undecided of what they want to do. Starting
Yeah.
these things are a very simple step to move forwards with and feel like you're gaining some control over the situation.
Totally. No, and that's so nice. And I mean, in terms of supplements, I think it's so unique to every person. But in terms of food, can you give like a
Absolutely.
brief, like basics? These are the best fertility foods, and that's like kind of stuff to stay away from?
Yes, yes, of course. So the idea really from a diet point of view is that I suppose the diet to optimize fertility is looking at a diet that's really full of whole foods. And what I mean by whole foods is foods that are not processed. So that would be, cakes, biscuits, ready-made packaged meals, cured meats. All of that stuff has involved some aspect of processing to take the original form of that food into something else, if you think about it that way. So when I think about whole foods, I'm looking at things like, whole grains. You're looking at fresh fruit and vegetables, which are full of fiber, which is really important. You're looking at lean proteins, so proteins such as oily fish, lean animal proteins in particular, and looking to reduce food groups that would be classified as inflammatory food groups. So what I mean by that is your processed foods. Quite often sugar will come into
Hmm.
that category, as well as dairy as well. There is discussions around gluten, but gluten is not necessarily something that everyone needs to cut out, but perhaps it's more about looking at the ratio of how much gluten you're having in your diet and what role that will play. But again, this is very individualized and tailored, so this is very kind of broad stroke
Of course.
advice. A person would really need to talk to a professional to understand what is going to work for them and work well for them. But I think the best phrase I can use is eat the rainbow.
Yeah.
Eat the rainbow when it comes to your fertility. And protein. Protein is without doubt the biggest singular molecule that is the building block for our hormones. Without it, our hormones just won't get what they need. So it's really important that our diet has a healthy amount of protein to sustain this. The other thing that we look at is lifestyle medicine. So what I mean by that is looking at what we are doing outside of our working lives to help mitigate the effects of day-to-day stress and pressures. As you've experienced yourself, and many of my patients that come through my doors talk about extreme stress. They're under the stress of not being able to conceive, the stress of fertility treatment, and finding the process quite overwhelming, really. So looking at, and it's not about telling someone to just try to relax.
Exactly.
That
Yeah.
doesn't work.
Best advice
When
ever
has
that
that
people give you, right?
ever worked? Even for myself, I think, oh, when I've tried to meditate, I'm just getting worked up, stressed out that this is not working for me. So enforcing that kind of pressure on yourself is not helping anyone. So I talk to my patients about finding things that bring them joy. And it's a
Yes.
very different thing. If you can find something that brings you joy, naturally you produce more of your happy hormones that will naturally help just regulate that stress response. So even as a starting point, it's like, is it going for a dance? Is it going out to walk in nature? Is it just spending an afternoon laughing with your girlfriends? You know, Whatever it is, tap into that. Make sure your life is full of those things, because that in itself can really make quite a powerful difference. So finding joy in the things that you remembered bringing you joy before this whole process started. And the last thing is lifestyle medicine again, but it's probably actually quite an important one, is reducing exposure to plastic. It's not something that's talked about quite a lot, but the evidence is mounting on the link between everyday plastic use, such as like Tupperware, cling film, things like that, water bottles,
Yeah,
being known endocrine disruptors. So if our endocrine system is disrupted, it will inevitably have some kind of effect on our hormonal health. So starting to just be more mindful about the choices we make around plastics, I think is a really good position to put yourself in. And you can make very simple changes, such as swapping your plastic Tupperware for glass reusable containers. It's a really simple change. Obviously, it's also very environmentally friendly. And, drinking water from glass bottles, not plastic bottles that have been sitting out in the sun. Really simple techniques that can just kind of start putting the body in a better position to move forward and explore, what comes next.
totally. I also a while ago went kind of through all our cupboards, got rid of all the plastics. I kind of just double checked or like questioned everything we had in terms of like Tupperware, as you said, or even like my water bottle, because those small
Yeah,
things. And I mean, when you are in the situation, you're kind of also willing to try anything and everything. So I also did that myself. And another thing I did was also try to reduce perfume as much as possible. I don't know what your take is on perfume, but I just read a lot of kind of
yeah,
its hormone disrupting capabilities. So I obviously stopped using perfume, but also my creams, makeup, soaps. I kind of got everything non-perfume. And it's funny because my husband, he loves to have like hand soap with
yeah.
perfume. So now in our bathroom, we literally have like a perfume hand soap for him and a non-perfume hand soap for me.
Sometimes it does happen like that. Yeah, there is a lot of again evidence that's building up out there to see that certain chemicals and preservatives that are used in personal products may have an impact. I think it's again, I think it's about just being mindful. Sometimes it's very difficult to this idea of overhauling everything.
Yeah,
Not just because it can be quite overwhelming, but also it can be quite a big financial strain as well. So it's really important to just kind of to not feel overwhelmed by this idea, because it can be scary. You suddenly, you
yes,
read. I think there's a book called "It Starts with the Egg," which it talks a lot about reducing plastic exposure and chemical exposure. But I've also, had patients come in and describe feeling incredibly overwhelmed by that book, as useful as it is. So in those situations, I just like just one thing at a time. If there's one simple thing that you can change each month, just try doing that thing, and don't feel you have to just
yes,
overhaul everything. The more we can move forwards to you know, a reduction in our chemical usage, it can only do us better, not just for our hormonal health, but our long-term
100%.
health in all aspects. But I really always want to try and reduce overwhelm for my patient. The whole process of trying to conceive, and especially when you're undergoing fertility treatments as well, is stressful enough.
Yeah,
So reducing overwhelm is so important. So that would be my biggest take: is yes, explore these things, but don't let it consume you.
exactly.
Otherwise, you're defeating the object of trying to help ways to reduce your stress. But if you can do it and it feels good to do it, by all means,
Exactly.
definitely, it will only serve you well in the long run.
Yeah, because I think on the one hand, it can be so empowering knowing, like, okay, these are small little things you can do that might potentially help. But at least I found it's really that emphasis is on potentially maybe help, right? It's not like if you do continue having, I don't know,
Yeah,
plastic Tupperware or using perfume, it doesn't mean that you are to blame, right? Because I think that's such a big thing in fertility struggles, that like
absolutely.
blame or it's my fault, right? So for you, and I said in the beginning, I think it's so incredible how, you get to help people and experience how it is when symptoms start to get better or when someone even manages to get pregnant. But how do you deal with people, getting bad news, or telling you, like, that IVF cycle failed, or maybe even that pregnancy didn't continue, or someone just feeling like incredibly down because they think that they are to blame? How do you deal with that? Because it must be really challenging, right, to do
Mm,
this on a daily, and to have clients, or customers for so long, and then seeing those ups and downs of their journeys.
absolutely. It's a really important question that you've raised. And we spend so much time thinking, like you say, the successes, that sometimes that the acknowledgement of the losses and the
Yeah.
difficulties are not talked about widely enough. So, obviously, it's absolutely devastating for patients to either experience miscarriage or have an IVF cycle that's failed. There's so much hope that's placed on that, and when that hope is taken away, it's a crushing blow. And if there's been a miscarriage, there's often a lot of trauma associated with that as well. So there's a lot going on for both the woman, and if there's a male partner involved, the male partner as well. Really, my first response in that typical type of situation is to firstly be someone who supports and listens, creating a supportive environment where that patient, the woman, can be seen and be listened to. you know, During this time, that they would have experienced a lot of emotional and physical challenges that arise from such a traumatic event. And it's my job to be able to help build that patient back up before embarking on the next steps and potentially future attempts. From a clinical perspective, I generally like to, when these situations occur, I will review all of the clinic information so I can see what went on, especially if they went through an assisted fertility round as well. I'm very, I like to have an eyeball what's gone on in the past, just so I can get a full understanding of picture of all the details that went up until that point. Sometimes this information can gleam
Mhm.
certain things that it's not a case that the fertility clinic may have not picked up on, but I would consider from a Chinese medicine perspective that this is an area that we still maybe need to think about, or this is an area of investigation that I believe that we might still need to explore before we kind of get you back on the path of, attempting to conceive again. Obviously, in some cases, it might mean that there's something else going on which is not showing up. So it's my job to dig a little bit deeper into that. I think you mentioned a phrase earlier on about the concept of unexplained fertility. And quite often in those scenarios, doctors, consultants may not always be able to give a reason why it's happened. They'll put it into that kind of
Which
category,
is the
going,
worst. Yeah.
it's just bad luck.
Hmm.
It's just one of those things. IVF doesn't work on the first. Yeah, with no real, and let's go again. I don't agree with that term of unexplained fertility. It is my job to dig that little bit deeper into what's going on so I can help get my clients the answers and the right support from their clinical teams going forward, so that they're going into that next stage of their life, be it through assisted fertility treatment or attempting to conceive again, with the right support from their clinical teams, feeling more in control of what the future might look like, and having the confidence in their
Yes.
bodies again. And that's really important. They lose faith in what their bodies are meant to be doing. And coming back to your point about guilt, all of those things can really weigh so heavily on your mind that you lose all trust in yourself. And it is my job to help build that up before they go into another round, so they feel just stronger in themselves, and that whatever the outcome, it is not them. and they shouldn't be blaming themselves. So that's how I generally look at supporting women who have gone
Yeah.
through such a difficult time.
No, that's so nice. And I mean, as a patient myself, I can only applaud you for doing that. And it's so important to do that, because oftentimes it's so hard, right? Like when you're just sitting in a doctor's office, and I talked about it on my first fertility series episode where I shared my IVF stim experience. But I took a long time to even find a doctor I liked, because in like the
Mm,
first couple I saw, I just felt like, one out of a million, and it felt like they're doing the same with every patient. And I think it's so important to find someone who is willing to actually look at your case uniquely, and who is willing to not accept unexplained infertility or whatever, and also who kind of asks you, well, are you doing acupuncture? And my doctor who I went with, he's incredibly supportive of acupuncture,
mm,
and I love that, right?
fantastic.
Because he was like, that's wonderful you're doing that, continue doing that. And I think that is so important to, find someone also like on the Western medicine side who will support, also if you are choosing to do the acupuncture route.
Absolutely.
Question did want to ask about IVF and acupuncture, because we talked a lot about how acupuncture supports kind of that natural cycle and the natural path of conceiving, and with cycle tracking and basal body temperature tracking. But IVF, from my own experience, is quite different, because your body is full of hormones, and kind of your temperature
Absolutely.
charts are all over the place. So how do you then support someone going through IVF, and how can acupuncture help there?
No, that's a great question. And, a lot of the inquiries I do get are around, acupuncture support for IVF. So I see it as two stages. The work we can do to support you prior to starting your IVF round, and then the work within the actual IVF cycle itself. In my experience, those who have had the opportunity and the time to work with me before their IVF cycle starts, generally the outcomes tend to be more positive. It might, when I say positive, it could be that it's more eggs are collected, more eggs are fertilized, there's different stages to that. But we look to try and optimize fertility and IVF outcomes by doing that work beforehand. And the reason why that work beforehand is so important is that physiologically, it takes 90 to 100 days for an egg to mature from its
Wow,
tiny, what we call primordial follicle state,
that's
all
so
the way
long.
through to
Wow.
ovulation. We often just think about it being this 2 weeks from when you've had your period to when you ovulate, but actually that journey started 90 to 100 days beforehand. So that's not,
Incredible.
when you break that down, that's roughly 3 months, 3 to 4 months. It's roughly 3 to 4 menstrual cycles. So when we get to work that time beforehand, it's 90 to 100 days to influence egg quality. It's 90 to 100 days to influence the hormonal environment in which those eggs are maturing and
Yeah.
developing. We get to support stress levels during that time. We get to identify any other areas of potential investigation that might be needed just before you embark on that IVF round to optimize IVF potential. It gives us opportunities to regulate the menstrual cycle. Quite often people are experiencing a lot of problems with their cycles, and IVF is seen as the solution to kind of bypassing all of that to hopefully conceive. But obviously, there's no, IVF clinics. Also, there's never any huge,
Yeah,
guarantee with that.
there isn't.
But if we can optimize the cycle, regulate it, get it starting on time, improve the hormonal imbalances and other things that occur during that time, be it digestive issues, be it sleep issues, energy levels, all these things, it can really put somebody in a much better place for when they embark on that round. So I generally, that is my ideal recommended time of working with a patient prior to starting. I do work with patients in a short amount of time, but we discuss the limitations around how I can support them in that time as such. So it might be just more about reducing stress during that time and feeling a bit more prepared going in. Then the second stage is the actual IVF cycle that comes about. So this can vary from woman to woman depending on what protocol they are on. But generally, acupuncture during the actual cycle itself looks to help provide an influential aspect to what the injected hormones are doing. At the same time, trying to mitigate some of the side effects that many women may experience during that time. We use points to help improve and build up the uterine lining during that stimulation phase. And then after someone's had their egg collection, we then look to support the transfer period for that patient. The number of treatments can vary quite greatly during that time according to how the patient's status, how many eggs they have, what their hormone levels doing, etc., protocols. But that's generally the way I would support. So even when you see it as a timeline, that pre-work is actually more valuable than the work in the IVF round itself, because we have been working on egg quality and follicular recruitment for that 90 to 100 day period. So where possible, I really encourage patients to start looking at, getting some support way ahead before their IVF cycle starts.
That's probably also my biggest learning. Like, it's a marathon, not a sprint, right? Like having that mentality that it takes a while, but that's okay, because every single, kind of thing you're doing will support, you getting to that finish line. So I think that's a really good mindset to be on, just thinking of it like as a long-term, kind of situation, a long-term project.
No, exactly, and it goes back to, I think I mentioned earlier this idea that acupuncture points are pills, which it isn't. Unfortunately, that's just not the way that this medicine has evolved and been created. And ultimately, I think we know that sometimes with certain medications, sometimes things come back, right? So, and that's not what we want to do here. We want to create longer lasting changes.
Yes.
So that it not only supports what's happening now, but for the future as well. So yeah, it's a really interesting time, and actually coming back to this idea of surprising moments, I think patients during that time really develop such a deeper awareness from themselves. They're more intuitively connected with what their bodies are doing. They understand it better, and they understand the reasons why these things are happening, which doesn't always happen if you're going straight into then the IVF round. And I suppose, surrendering yourself to the process and just allowing, but then the devastation, if it doesn't work out, can be really hard. So I do believe that preparation work is very critical and very key to future, optimizing future fertility health and potential.
Well, thank you for doing that amazing work, and thank you for everything you do. Please continue spreading, help. But I also feel like you have such a wonderful personality and joy and warmth. So I guess I'll just speak for all of your patients and say thank you so much for everything you do. And thank you for coming today on my podcast and sharing your learnings.
Oh, that's so kind of you to say. Oh, that was lovely. I really enjoyed speaking to you about it and getting the opportunity to kind of chat through everything. It's nice to be able to explore it in a wider context and also see how it really positively impacts people, how it positively impacted yourself. I'm very grateful I get to do what I do. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to share that with you and share it with your listeners.
Thank you so much, Samina. Have a wonderful rest of your day.